Hey everybody, this is Kris Kendall ringing in the new year with a brand new video. Now the biggest difference for me between 2018 and 2019 is going to be my setup. More specifically, my laptop. So I switched from my 2015 HP Omen to a 2017 MacBook Air. And I like the Mac experience a whole lot better. The only issue is that they don't exactly make MacBook Airs with the top spec and graphics cards. So that meant CPU rendering for me. Now I had to figure out how to make CPU rendering a whole heck of a lot faster so that I wouldn't be sitting for hours and hours and hours rendering frames on my MacBook Air. I've been doing a lot of experimenting with the Blender Cycles render engine to see how I can make it faster. And today I'm going to share my discoveries with you guys. So let's jump into Blender Cycles and see what I figured out. Alright, so we've got this render that Suzanne had already done in Blender Cycles. Now the image took 16 minutes to render because it's almost completely unoptimized. Most of the settings are at their defaults that load as soon as you switch to the Cycles render engine. We're going to change this and make it a whole heck of a lot faster. Let's get into it. Alright, so the first thing you're going to want to adjust is your light paths. One of the reasons why Blender Cycles takes so long to render is that it prioritizes realism. Let's say, however, that you're like me and you'd prefer speed over realism for animations with hundreds of frames. Well, what we can do in the light paths panel is bring down the number of bounces. Cycles by default tries to simulate reality. But since we're not trying to simulate reality and we're trying to make cartoons, we're going to drastically take down the number of bounces. You can set up your settings to the settings that I have here. The next thing you're going to want to adjust is your tile size. This is an important property because on a CPU, a small tile size is best, and on a GPU, a large tile size is best. You can automatically find which tile size is best for your hardware by going into the add-ons panel and enabling auto tile size. Then you go into the performance panel and click on the button that says auto tile size, and it'll automatically figure out which tile size is best for you. Now we're going to get into sampling. So what I've seen that helps a whole lot when it comes to speed is switching over to branched path tracing. This is incredibly helpful because it only focuses samples in the areas that you want it to. If you're on regular path tracing, it'll put an equal amount of samples everywhere. That's really not too helpful if you're on a CPU, because it'll often spend up to 2 minutes rendering things that you don't need, such as completely empty space. You can configure your settings as follows, but don't be afraid to mess with them, just in case the settings that I have aren't applicable to your scene. For example, if you have no subsurface materials, you really don't need any subsurface samples. After that, you're going to want to go into the settings for any lamps in the environment and set the samples to be 100 for both. The last step is going to be scene optimization, where you're going to just basically not render things you don't need. So the first thing you're going to do is reduce the poly count on any meshes. Then you're going to want to disable the ray visibility of any channels that you don't really need, such as the diffuse in the event that you don't need light to bounce from the floor to the model, or transmission and volume scatter in the event that you don't have any transmission or volume scatter materials. Next, to make things a little bit faster, you're going to want to render any static parts of your scene into a still image so that you can reuse it instead of rendering the same unchanging things over and over and over again. Next, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to scale down the floor plane and change it into a shadow catcher. That way we're creating as much empty space as possible in the scene. This is because, as we've said before, the branched path tracer will basically ignore all of the space that's completely empty. And now the moment we've all been waiting for, the actual rendering. As you can see, it's taken just over a minute to render our model, which we can then composite over the static background. After that, it'll look like this. So we've gone from 16 minutes to just 1 minute to render a whole image with minimal differences in quality. Well, I guess that's all we have for today. This is Kris Kendall signing off. Hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, subscribe and leave a like. See you later.